The McAlvany Weekly Commentary, covering monetary, economic, and geopolitical news events. Now here are Kevin Orrick and David McAlvany.
This is a kind of one of those fulcrum or turning points in American history where we might see a mandate for the Democrats, but a mandate for what? Is it a mandate for, in a sense, Obama's campaign, which is focused on change, is content-free? Because change can mean anything. You can move to the left, you can move to the right, you can stay resolutely toward the center. I think what Americans are looking for is to preserve, if you will, the centrist and conservative values that most Americans have, but on the other hand, to adapt those values to new circumstances. So I don't think people are looking for a massive government takeover of the economy. I don't think people have more confidence that politicians are going to be better in managing our economy than guys on Wall Street.
That was the voice of our guest today, Dinesh D'Souza. Welcome to the McAlvany Weekly Commentary. I'm Kevin Orrick along with David McAlvany, and today, David, we've got highly respected guest, Dinesh D'Souza. He wrote a book, obviously, that's out on the shelves right now called What's So Great About Christianity, but he's written so many other things that would seem pertinent to this period of time right before the election.
Well, Kevin, we really are at a turning point from an economic standpoint, from a financial, from a social, from a political. All of these things are coming together, and here just before the election, we wanted to bring a different perspective, a gentleman who spent time in the public policy arena and has written not everything from education to racism, The End of Racism, a great book of his written in 95, The Virtue of Prosperity, What's So Great About America, Letter to a Young Conservative, and then, as you mentioned, his most recent book, What's So Great About Christianity. So he ties together a whole worldview, if you will, and brings a unique perspective. We're excited to have Dinesh with us this morning.
And one of the main questions that we have, especially in the light of the many books that you've written, the latest being What's So Great About Christianity, one of the things that you address in that book is the rise of secularism maybe in Europe and United States, but actually there's more of a rise of religion worldwide. Now, from an economic perspective, we know that economic leadership comes from America and Europe, and we're experiencing great pain right now and probably will experience much more. How do you see that affecting the world and the attitude of Americans as we're moving into possibly a political system that we've never seen before?
Well, I think that there's a close connection, in a way, between the civic, cultural, and moral habits of a community and its economic condition. I was recently reading Tom Brokaw's book, The Greatest Generation, and I asked myself, where did the virtues of the greatest generation come from? And if you think about it, they came from the Depression and they came from World War II. Many of the things we celebrate about that generation, its frugality, its self-discipline, its sense of community, came out of the pressures and challenges of the Depression and the war. And in some ways, you could ask, how did the greatest generation fail? It did fail in one important respect. It was unable to replicate itself or to produce a new great generation. And I think one reason for that was affluence. The parents of the 40s and 50s wanted to give their children what the parents never had, and in trying to give their children what the parents never had, in some ways the frugal and disciplined deferred gratification generation of World War II produced, you might say, the spoiled children of the 1960s. So I offer this as an historical analogy to say, hey, if we're in for some prolonged recession, some economic hard times, I think we're going to see a transformation also of the way Americans look at issues like savings, frugality, community, and so on.
Well, from that standpoint, certainly there's a role for leadership moving forward. We've seen the rise of religion, the rise of values and morals, more or less on a global basis. And you point out in your latest book, What's So Great About Christianity, how there is something of a shrinking of a faith culture in the West and in the United States. As we've mentioned in previous shows, the Czechoslovakian president Václav Havel has described Europe as the first atheistic civilization in the history of mankind. Do we see a different financial or economic leadership moving forward as you see faith cultures developing and laying a different sort of groundwork, be it in Africa, be it in China, be it in South America?
Well, for many years, the assumption was that all civilizations, as they became more modern and more technological, more scientific, would move in the direction of Europe and become more secular. Modernization equals secularization. This was the expectation. Turns out it's not really happening. America, for example, is just as modern, in some respects more modern, more technological than Europe. and yet America hasn't gone the way of Europe. It remains perhaps the most religious society in the industrialized world. Second, the rapidly modernizing countries of China and India, far from becoming more secular, are in some respects becoming more religious. There's a big Hindu revival in India. Christianity is spreading rapidly in China. And Christianity is spreading also around the world, in Africa, in Asia, in South America, the revival of a sort of Pentecostal or evangelical Christianity. So what's really happening is that the world is becoming more religious at a time when Europe has become more secular, with America caught kind of in between. We have seen here in America the rise of sort of an explicit kind of atheism, which has sort of surfed on the wave of 9/11. In a sense, the atheists are saying that you got the Islamic radicals over there, you got the Christian extremists over here, and those two groups are kind of the same because they're fueling their fanaticism at the same holy gas station. So you have this attempt to make an analogy. I think it's, in the end, a little bit of a specious or bogus analogy between Islamic radicalism on one side and Christianity on the other.
Would you not say that the response to the Depression, you were talking about values that came out of the last Depression and World War II, frugality, self-discipline, and you said that a lot of that probably was lost through affluence, but the response saying that we were going into a recession or a depressionary period worse than we've had since the 30s, do you feel that the response would be the same, a return to frugality, a return to self-discipline, things that we've probably sensed that we had lost? Could we regain it in this time?
There's no question about it. I'm not advocating economic hard times so we can improve our national character. Don't get me wrong. But it is true that necessity, if you will, economic hardship, I mean, that's a very good school teacher in a certain way. Look, for many years I would hear politicians say, oh, gee, we've got to teach the American government to balance its checkbook just like the average American family. Sort of the government learning from the family. But in reality, what's happened in America is, you might say, the opposite, and that is that the average American family has learned its bad habits from its government. And so instead of the government balancing its checkbook, the average American family goes, well, the government really doesn't bother to make ends meet, so why should I? Even though I'm earning $45,000, I can have $12,000 of debt on my credit card and pay 14% interest on that. And I can buy a $390,000 house even though I really can't afford it. If I can make the payments for the next year or the next 3 years, I'll go for it. So what you really have is, you can almost say, fiscal irresponsibility at the government level, having now metastasized into the culture. What's going to change all that is simply the sense that you won't be able to get away with that anymore. Now, as long as the government keeps bailing you out, you will. But the moment you, in a sense, we have accountability and the idea that, hey, you're going to have to ultimately answer for your actions, that's really going to make, I think, people reconsider and say things like, listen, if I don't save a little bit more money for my retirement, I'm going to be much worse off than I am today. Or the fact that I'm going to have to make some provision for my own health care, or otherwise I'm going to be dependent on my own children. So I think that these sorts of questions, which people ordinarily don't think about because they think someone else is going to bail you out, someone else is going to pay for it, in economic hard times, you're going to have to look a little more carefully at these things.
Well, Dinesh, as a former policy analyst at the Reagan White House, you've had to give input in the past as to what the government should do. In this case, whether we have a McCain ticket or whether we have an Obama ticket, what would be the advice to the government at this point? Because the government seems to be responding in a continuation. These bailout plans are actually just a continuation of what got us into the problem in the first place, and a delay of payment. But still, the payment has to be made. What would you say would be a good policy direction right now for either administration, given the situation we're in?
Well, the thing about the bailout is that whatever its economic justification, politically, it sends a horrendous message. Because it's clearly the case that had these economic schemes perpetrated by banks, by lenders, and so on, had they worked, had they produced an avalanche of profits, those profits would not have been shared with the taxpayer. But now that they've blown up and produced bankruptcy and debt, the taxpayer's got to jump in and cover the bill. Well, that's the very opposite of the kind of both fiscal accountability and moral accountability that you expect in capitalism and in America. So I think that there is a kind of silent wave of outrage at this idea of bailouts, particularly on this very expensive scale. Now, in some ways, I think the big question facing us is this, and that is for the past almost 30 years now, American politics has been shaped by the Reagan Revolution, by the idea that it's not the bureaucrat, but the entrepreneur